Thank you for having invited me to speak on Yemen, a country that doesn't get as much coverage as the other Middle Eastern countries get. On March 26th of this year, began in Yemen a campaign of massive aerial bombardments by a coalition of Gulf states led by Saudi Arabia, with the exception of Oman, in addition to a variety of other Arab and African states, with the intention of defeating the Ansar Allah, a Zaydi revival armed group commonly known as the Houthis, allied with former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, and who had taken control of the country after overthrowing the government. I will not delve into the meanders of a complex political situation, but would like to point out just a few key elements before I show you pictures in that quagmire of an ongoing generalized war and its impact on the country's cultural heritage. The deterioration of the political and economic situation, a worsening poverty and prevailing frustration culminated in the mass uprisings that swept throughout the country in late January 2011, after Tunisia and Egypt, and demanding the downfall of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had been ruling the country for over 3 decades. Saleh was forced to step down in November 2011 after, under pressure from the Gulf Cooperative Council countries, and in particular from Saudi Arabia. Incidentally, the Council has always refused to include Yemen, which is the only republic in the peninsula. In February 2012, Abd Mansour Hadi, Saleh's former deputy, was elected president for a transitory period of 2 years. In the following year, he launched a national dialogue conference gathering the country's principal political forces, which resulted in a proposal for a new federal system dividing the country into 6 regions. This reform fell through as a result of a deteriorating the political situation, and in 2014, Houthi troops advanced throughout northern Yemen. With the help, let me show you a map of Yemen, with the help of Yemeni armed forces loyal to former President Saleh, the Houthis succeeded in conquering Sana'a on September 21st, 2014. And President Hadi was forced to resign, and Parliament was dissolved a few months later. However, Hadi, who rescinded his resignation and escaped to Aden in February 2015, sought refuge in Saudi Arabia, along with members of his government, when the Houthis, who decided to control the rest of the country, penetrated in the southern regions of Yemen. With an official count of over 6,000 deaths, of over 30,000 injured, and probably more, and an estimated of 2 million displaced, this war has also had a devastating impact on the country's infrastructure. Coalition airstrikes have targeted a number of cities and towns under the control of the Houthis and Saleh forces, while the latter have conducted destructive ground operations in the southern parts of Yemen, and particularly in the cities of Aden and Taiz. Local and Western scholars and academics have already sounded the alarm by putting forward to the coalition a list of the main archaeological sites to be avoided. However, this was not effective in halting bombs from targeting them. International institutions have issued statements condemning the armed conflict and military intervention, and the UNESCO called for an emergency action plan for the safeguarding of Yemen's cultural heritage last July. Brief reports of damage to sites, journalistic articles, and a few photographs circulating on the internet, as well as word of mouth from colleagues in Yemen, are the only means currently available for documenting what is happening to Yemen's cultural heritage. There is hardly any possibility to conduct independent inquiries in this context of war. The General Organization for Antiquities and Museums, the official body that governs all matters related to archaeological sites and historical monuments, as well as museums, and whose headquarters are based in Sana'a, has limited resources and personnel. Few of its staff possesses the knowledge of modern methods of documenting cultural heritage, even though there have been training courses by archaeological expeditions who have been working in Yemen for the last 30 years, but it's still very limited. While the Antiquities Department has drawn a list of almost 50 damaged sites throughout the country, a list which I received about 2 weeks ago, giving each site or monument an estimated destruction level varying from 10% to 100%, was sort of all gone. Unfortunately, the list lacks a description of what the actual damages are. It is therefore a challenging task to present an objective assessment of the extent of the damages incurred in the absence of tangible data. As you all know, the Greeks and Romans referred to the pre-Islamic kingdoms of southern Arabia as Arabia Felix, or Arabia the Blessed, due to their immense wealth and political power. For more than 1,000 years, from about the 8th century BCE to 600 CE, the rich and powerful kingdoms of Qataban, Ma'in, Saba, and Himyar ruled over much of the territory occupied by modern-day Yemen. The wealth of these kingdoms derived from their control over the caravan and maritime trade routes, and from the international, and the trade in frankincense and myrrh, two local commodities which were greatly prized in the ancient world. You're looking at the Ma'rib Dam, one of the sluices of the famous Ma'rib Dam, because these kingdoms achieved impressive feats in technology, engineering, and the conservation of natural resources as demonstrated by the dam, and which dates from the kingdom of Saba, referred to in the Quran, an example of a highly sophisticated irrigation system for the inhabitants of southern Arabia, who had to rely on the periodical monsoon rainfalls for the water needed for their existence. The Sabaean capital, Marib, held a commanding position on the caravan routes, has been the focus of archaeological excavations where important architectural vestiges and considerable numbers of inscriptions and stone funerary sculptures have been unearthed, thus shedding new light on the rich political, social, and economic and religious organization of Yemen's ancient civilization. Yemen's, so these just a few examples to show you a Sabaean inscription. All three, the central, lower central, I have one of these. This is the only object that is in the Aden Museum. Was excavated in Shabwa by a French archaeological expedition. The Yemen's rich ancient heritage is a great source of pride to all Yemenis and constitute an important element of their national identity. As you can see by this example of a 50 rial note, on which appears a drawing of the bronze statue of Mahdi Karib, which was excavated by the American Foundation for the Study of Man in the early 50s. Another source of pride for Yemenis is their incredibly varied vernacular architecture, which can be described, and I'm not exaggerating, as the most spectacular in the Arab world. Each region in Yemen has a distinctive style which characterizes it from the other, as we can see on the screen. Dar al-Hajar, just in near Sana'a, Zabid on the coastal Red Sea city that is on brick architecture, the village of Hajara, and in the northern part, the mud brick architecture, Pise. In all, stucco plays an important role in outlining details, the windows and other features of decorative friezes and crenellations. Just incidentally, Yemeni towns, most of them, except with the coastal towns, are a concentration of high houses which existed in pre-Islamic Yemen. For example, there is a Himyaritic inscription that refers to the construction of a house with 6 floors and 6 ceilings. So this is something that goes back a long time. And as many of you know, that Yemen has 3 cities on the World Heritage List: Sana'a on top, Shibam, which is usually referred to as the Manhattan of the desert, which has these incredible mud brick buildings that are as high as 12 stories. And this is Zabid on the coast, of which you just saw an example of one of the houses. According to Yemeni newspapers' reports, the Marib Dam was struck during the bombardments by the coalition 4 times. These top pictures that you see have been identified as damages in the dam, while the lower part, Sirwah, another site located about 35 to 40 kilometers west of Marib, and which was a Sabaean religious center, also sustained important damage. Baraqish, the walled city of Baraqish, or Yathil, by its ancient name, was the most important city of the kingdom of Ma'in. An Italian archaeological team working there for almost 20 years unearthed the temple of Naqra, dating from the 7th all the way to the 3rd century BCE. Both the temple and the Italian dig house were totally destroyed. We don't know whether any troops were stationed by and why these became targets for the bombardments, and these were on the list, the no-hit list. One of the images which sent waves of shock around the world was that of the cluster of houses in Sana'a, in old Sana'a. Sana'a has grown tremendously in the last 30 years, which were destroyed during an air raid. The houses were part of a well-known ensemble overlooking one of the city's neighborhood vegetable gardens known as Maqshama. I mean, you can see this. I took this photo before, and these comes from one of the reports. As you can see, the damage that was done. It is one of the most photographed touristic spots in the city because tourists usually, used to. There were not that many tourists in Yemen, but those who arrived would usually arrive into the old city and come across this part of town. Situated then, Sana'a has been in a mountain valley at an altitude of 2,200 meters. Sana'a had been inhabited for more than 2,500 years. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the city became a major center for the propagation of Islam. This religious and political heritage is attested to by its 103 mosques, 14 hammams, and over 6,000 houses. And I'm talking about the houses inside the old city. The buildings demonstrate exceptional craftsmanship in the use of local materials and techniques. As I mentioned earlier, the architectural know-how is ancient, as attested by the South Arabian inscriptions, and the one I mentioned earlier, as well as medieval Islamic sources which describe Sana'a houses as tall and imposing. The upper stories of the houses are generally more recent than the lower parts. For some of you who may ask me about the dating, what research has shown is that the earliest may date from the 12th to the 15th centuries, but these houses have been restored over the centuries, over the years, and some have collapsed, some have been reconstructed. Those that have collapsed before were reconstructed in the same style. The sad one of the cities in the north, and that's in the north part of Yemen, Sa'da, the old walled city of Saada, all built in mud brick, presents, as you can see, a different type of harmonious architectural unity, but unfortunately it missed out being on the UNESCO heritage list. Until the early 80s, it managed to remain almost unaffected by modern urban development. Because it is considered the birthplace of Zayedism and the center of the Houthi movement, the city was specifically targeted by the coalition and was fiercely bombarded, particularly last May. Established in Saada in the late 9th century by Al-Hadi, Yahya, a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, through Zayd, the son of the 4th Shia Imam, the Zaydi Imamate ruled parts of Yemen from the 10th to the 20th century. And just to show you, and this comes from the Human Rights Watch site, as I've indicated, and it shows you the mosque and where the circles where the bombs fell. So constructed in the early 10th century, but enlarged in subsequent centuries, the mosque has great religious status because it houses the Imam's tomb as well as several of his successors. It is difficult to assess the extent of the damage caused by the bombs, which fell around it from the pictures and from film clips made by Al-Masira, a Houthi television news channel. I've watched all that on the internet, and there is damage and cracklings and things that have fallen off. But there are no pictures of the inside, so we really don't know. Taiz, currently under siege by the Houthi and Saleh troops. Taiz is Yemen's third city after Sana'a and Aden, and it owes its fame to its role as the capital of the Rasulid dynasty, which ruled over 2 centuries, from 1229 to 1454. The citadel that you're looking at, perched on top of a little hill, which dominates the city, dates from the 11th century, but it was really invested by the Rasulids in the 13th through the 15th centuries, and subsequently became a notorious prison during the reign of the last, the Imam Ahmad, who ruled in the from 1948 to 1962, before the advent of the Republic. Subsequently, it became an army-restricted zone well into about the year 2000. In 2002, restoration work of the citadel was started by the Ministry of Culture and was finished in 2014. However, this is the state. This is another picture that came on the internet to show you how it was bombed by the coalition because the Houthis were in there. So they've used these the citadel as a military zone to bomb, I guess, the parts of the city as well. So there's a lot of, just to show you, one of the most outstanding Islamic period monuments, Madrasa and Mosque of Al-Ashrafiyya, which was built in 1400, it stands at the foothill of the citadel, and this is the only picture I was able to find. There's damage to the minaret, one of the 2 minarets, and I suspect that rocks fell off the citadel because it really is close to the foothill. Another problem, here, this is a museum. The Museum of Salah was a former palace of the Imam Ahmad, and it had a motley collection of historical objects and of the Imam's personal belongings. Apparently, I found articles saying that the museum had been abandoned before this happened. And it had been left unattended. And I've saw pictures of windows broken, and we don't know about the content of the museum. But it seems that there were troops stationed near it. Of course, there's the other main museum that was totally destroyed, the Damar Museum, which held about 1,200 artifacts, 12,000, fruits of an American Yemeni archaeological dig. So that was one of the main blunders of the coalition. Several powerful bombs fell on Zabid. This is one of the cities on the cultural heritage list. And so the people were immediately concerned about what damage there may have been. And because I lived there for a few months, I knew the city. And thankfully, there's been a lot of dead people there. But the bombs fell on the outskirts of the city. Another tragedy, the former British colony of Aden and the capital of former South Yemen. Aden had suffered greatly during the war as the Houthi Saleh troops crushed their way into its different neighborhoods. Little remains of Aden's ancient medieval, really, architecture. So most of its distinctive architecture dates from the colonial period. And there are newspaper reports of damage to its medieval water tanks, but there are no really pictures to show that. So that's crater for those who may know Aden. And this picture I took when I was last there in 2008. Not the same shot, but it gives you an idea of what those houses were like. The Aden Military Museum was severely damaged. We don't know anything about its content. And Steamer Point, again, this picture, just was known as Prince of Wales Pier, an old photograph from colonial period, and this is where it's come to. Aden's had different communities, Indian, African, and European, who had coexisted, and they left their mark in the city's architecture. The presence of churches is exceptional in the Arabian Peninsula, functioning churches, of course. Aden's pluralism, even though it had become part of the realm of memory more than of reality in the last few years, is fast disappearing as fundamentalist armed groups, the jihadist types, Qaeda and Daesh, have been targeting anything that doesn't fit into their agenda of exclusion. The humiliation of local communities then and the broadcasting of a radical ideology of religious fanaticism have taken a turn to a worse, as we can see with this, the destruction. I'm showing you the picture of the mosque, the Ismaili Mosque of Al-Khoja in 2008. I took this photo. And then it was suffered bombs. We don't know who bombed it. They say it was Houthi bombings. And then a jihadist group came in with this engine, and they started demolishing it. So no more. This mosque is a recent, it's early 20th century, but it was a landmark in the city. So these groups, among which Al-Qaeda have also targeted the tombs of saints and Sufis, like we've seen in Syria, Iraq, and Libya. And dozens so far have been destroyed in Mukalla, Shehr, and Ghail Bawazir. And this is the tomb of Sheikh Yaqub, who is the patron saint of Mukalla. And so they came in at night and sort of started destroying it, and then now what it's like. So one should not forget that the war in Yemen is also a war of propaganda, unfortunately, where the damage inflicted upon cultural heritage is manipulated by all sides, by exaggerating or minimizing the extent of the damage, or by making the opponent solely responsible for the devastation. While a large part of the destruction is the result of the coalition aerial bombings, one shouldn't forget that the massive use of artillery in cities such as Taiz and Aden has resulted in great destruction. It is evident that the issue of cultural heritage beyond its historical value is used to discredit the enemy by presenting him as an external force intending on destroying Yemen's national identity. And that applies for the two main protagonists. There are different levels for this complex war in Yemen in which exist many fronts and actors, so it is difficult to reduce it to a fight between two camps. The diverse jihadist movements constitute now an aggravated threat on the diverse and unique religious heritage of Yemen. The cultural heritage of Yemen is a unique, I'm using unique again, and an irreplaceable witness for its rich and diverse history. One can only hope that the negotiations which started yesterday in Geneva will lead to a peaceful solution. Thank you for your attention.